When I landed the job as assistant maintenance supervisor at Riverside Heights, the most prestigious apartment complex in downtown Denver, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. The salary was decent, the benefits were solid, and the property itself was stunning. 30 floors of luxury units, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains. Fresh out of my engineering degree with a specialization in building systems, I was eager to prove myself in the real world. My name is Jessica Martinez, and at 24, I was probably the youngest person ever hired for this position at Riverside Heights. The complex housed over 800 units, mostly occupied by tech executives, lawyers, and other high-income professionals who paid premium rent for premium living. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and crystal chandeliers, while the rooftop amenities included a heated pool, fitness center, and panoramic city views. On my first day, I met my boss, Frank Kellerman, the head maintenance manager. Frank was a stocky man in his 50s with graying hair and calloused hands that spoke of decades in maintenance work. He had that old-school blue-collar attitude that seemed friendly enough during our initial meeting. He showed me around the mechanical rooms, introduced me to the basic systems, and explained that my job would involve everything from tenant requests to preventive maintenance on the building's critical infrastructure. "Welcome aboard, Jessica," he said with what seemed like genuine warmth. "We're glad to have some fresh blood around here. The building's getting more complex every year with all these smart systems and environmental regulations." The other maintenance staff, Mike, Tony, and Carlos, seemed welcoming too. They were all older guys who'd been working there for years, and they joked about finally having someone around who understood all the newfangled computer systems that controlled everything from the HVAC to the security cameras. But even during that first week, I noticed something odd. Frank had a peculiar way of talking about the building's problems. Whenever I'd suggest looking into a recurring issue, like the strange vibrations in the north elevator shaft or the intermittent power fluctuations on floors 15 to 18, he'd wave it off with a laugh. "Don't worry about that stuff, Jessica. These old buildings have their quirks. We just patch things up and keep moving. The residents don't need to know about every little hiccup." The first red flags 3 weeks into the job, I started to see Frank's true colors. It began when Mrs. Williams in 12B called about a persistent water leak in her bathroom ceiling. The stain had been growing for weeks, and she was understandably frustrated that previous work orders seemed to disappear into thin air. I volunteered to take the call since I was eager to handle real maintenance issues. When I inspected her unit, I immediately saw this wasn't just a minor leak. The ceiling showed signs of significant water damage, with soft spots that suggested structural issues behind the drywall. Worse, I detected a musty smell that screamed mold problems. I documented everything with photos and detailed notes, then presented my findings to Frank. "We need to open up that ceiling and check the pipes," I told him. "This could be a major water line issue, and if there's mold growing, we have a health hazard on our hands." Frank barely glanced at my report. Jessica, he said with a condescending chuckle. "You're overthinking this. It's probably just a little condensation from the AC unit upstairs. Tony can slap some spackle on it and paint over the stain. Problem solved." "But Frank, the building codes require us to—" "Look, sweetheart," he interrupted, and I immediately bristled at the term. "I've been doing this job since before you were born. These rich tenants complain about everything. Give them a fresh coat of paint, and they'll forget all about it. We don't need to tear apart walls for every little water spot." When I tried to explain the potential liability issues, Frank's expression hardened. "Jessica, are you questioning my judgment? Because if you can't handle taking direction from someone with actual experience, maybe this job isn't the right fit for you." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I backed down, but the seed of doubt was planted. Over the next week, I watched Tony do exactly what Frank had ordered: patch, paint, and move on. Mrs. Chen seemed satisfied with the cosmetic fix, unaware that the underlying problem was still festering behind her freshly painted ceiling. That same week, I noticed Frank had a habit of dismissing my suggestions in front of the other guys. When I'd point out a potential safety issue or recommend a preventive maintenance protocol, he'd cut me off with comments like, "That's cute, but let me show you how we really do things here," or "Book learning is fine, but this is the real world, kiddo." The pattern emerges by my second month. Frank's behavior had shifted from condescending to openly hostile. It started with him assigning me increasingly menial tasks while the other guys handled the real maintenance work. While Mike and Tony were troubleshooting complex HVAC issues or electrical problems, I found myself stuck doing inventory, filing work orders, and handling what Frank called tenant hand-holding. Basically any complaint that involved actually talking to residents. "Women are naturally better at customer service," he'd say with a smirk. "You've got that gentle touch that calms people down. Leave the technical stuff to those of us who know what we're doing." The breaking point came when I discovered a serious issue with the building's fire suppression system. During my routine inspection of the mechanical rooms, a task Frank had assigned me, probably thinking it was busy work, I noticed that several sprinkler zones on floors 20 to 25 were showing fault codes on the control panel. When I dug deeper, I found that the water pressure in those zones was running about 30% below the required specifications. This wasn't a minor issue. If there was a fire on those floors, the sprinkler system might not have enough pressure to function properly. I immediately documented everything and rushed to Frank's office with my findings. "Frank, we have a major problem," I said, laying out my documentation. "The fire suppression system is compromised on 5 floors. We need to call in a certified fire safety contractor immediately." Frank looked at my report with obvious annoyance. "Jessica, you're being dramatic. The system's probably fine. These digital readouts glitch all the time. But the water pressure measurements are probably wrong," he cut me off. "Look, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're creating problems where none exist. The building's been fine for 15 years. A few blinking lights don't mean we need to panic and spend thousands on contractors." I tried to explain the liability issues, the potential for catastrophic loss of life, the legal requirements for maintaining fire safety systems. Frank's response was to reassign me to lighter duties and warn me about crying wolf too often. That afternoon, I'd overheard him talking to Mike and Tony in the break room. "The new girl's got a case of engineer's disease," he said with a laugh. "Thinks she knows everything because she's got a fancy degree. Doesn't understand that half this job is keeping the residents calm and the costs down. She'll learn." What made it worse was that Mike and Tony, guys who had been friendly to me initially, started treating me differently. Suddenly, I was excluded from their conversations about ongoing projects. They'd stop talking when I entered a room, or they'd make subtle comments about book smart versus street smart maintenance work. The breaking point, the situation reached a crisis in my 3rd month when I uncovered something that made my blood run cold. While organizing old maintenance files, another busy work assignment from Frank, I discovered a pattern that had been hidden in plain sight. Over the past 2 years, there had been dozens of work orders related to water damage, electrical shorts, elevator malfunctions, and HVAC failures that had been marked as completed without any actual repair work being done. The files showed a systematic pattern of Frank's crew doing cosmetic fixes while ignoring underlying infrastructure problems. Even worse, several work orders for safety-critical systems had been falsified, showing inspections and repairs that had never actually happened. The most damning evidence was a series of memos from the building's insurance company requesting documentation of fire safety system maintenance. Frank had submitted fake inspection reports, claiming that certified contractors had serviced the sprinkler systems when no such work had been performed. The insurance company had issued coverage based on these fraudulent documents. I realized I was looking at a massive cover-up that put every resident in the building at risk. If there was ever a serious fire, flood, or structural failure, people could die because of Frank's negligence. And the building's owners, Riverside Properties LLC, were potentially facing millions in liability if this ever came to light. I knew I had to act, but I also knew Frank would destroy me professionally if I went over his head without ironclad evidence. So I started secretly documenting everything. I used my after-hours access to photograph the falsified records, document the current state of critical systems, and build a comprehensive case that even Frank couldn't dismiss or cover up. But Frank was getting suspicious of my activities. He started showing up unexpectedly when I was working late, asking pointed questions about what I was doing. One evening, he cornered me in the mechanical room where I was taking detailed photos of the fire suppression control panel. "Jessica, what exactly are you doing here?" His voice had a threatening edge I'd never heard before. "Just checking the readings like you asked me to," I lied. "I never asked you to take pictures of anything. In fact, I'm starting to wonder if you're the right fit for this team. You seem more interested in finding problems than solving them." The threat was unmistakable. Frank was laying the groundwork to fire me, probably claiming I was insubordinate or incompetent. I realized I was running out of time. Building the case that weekend, I spent hours at home organizing my evidence and researching my options. I knew I couldn't just go to Frank's supervisor. He'd been with the company for 15 years and had strong relationships with upper management. I needed external leverage. My first call was to my former professor, Dr. Williams, who specialized in building safety systems. When I showed him my documentation, his reaction was immediate and intense. "Jessica, this is criminal negligence," he said, reviewing the photos of falsified inspection records. "If someone dies because of these systems failures, your boss could face manslaughter charges. The building owners could lose everything in lawsuits." Dr. Williams connected me with a contact at the Denver Fire Department's Prevention Bureau, Inspector Patricia Rodriguez. When I met with Inspector Rodriguez and showed her my evidence, she became very quiet and very serious. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "Based on the files I found, at least 2 years, maybe longer." Inspector Rodriguez made some notes and then looked at me intently. "Ms. Martinez, I need you to understand something. If what you're showing me is accurate, we're talking about violations that could shut down this building immediately. Hundreds of people could be displaced. Are you absolutely certain about this information?" I walked her through every piece of evidence, from the falsified fire system inspections to the documented water pressure problems to the pattern of cosmetic fixes covering up serious infrastructure issues. By the end of our meeting, Inspector Rodriguez was already making calls to schedule immediate inspection. But I knew Frank would figure out I was behind the investigation, so I needed to protect myself. I made copies of everything and stored them in multiple locations. I also reached out to a lawyer who specialized in whistleblower protection, just in case Frank tried to retaliate by firing me or damaging my professional reputation. The lawyer, Sarah Kim, was intrigued by my case. "You've got strong documentation," she said, "but you need to be careful. If your boss is willing to falsify safety records, he might be willing to do other things to protect himself. Document everything going forward, and don't let anyone know you've contacted outside authorities." Meanwhile, I had to continue working normally while knowing that Inspector Rodriguez was planning an unannounced visit that would likely expose years of Frank's cover-ups. The stress was incredible, but I kept reminding myself that people's lives were at stake. The investigation begins. Inspector Rodriguez arrived on a Tuesday morning without warning, accompanied by 2 other fire safety officials and a representative from the city's Building Code Enforcement Office. They demanded immediate access to all fire safety systems, maintenance records, and recent inspection documentation. Frank's reaction was everything I had expected and more. His face went pale when he saw the official badges, and he immediately went into damage control mode, trying to charm and deflect the investigators while frantically texting someone. probably his supervisor or the building management company. "Gentlemen, what can I do for you today?" Frank said with forced cheerfulness. "Is this just a routine inspection? I'm sure we can work around your schedule." Inspector Rodriguez wasn't buying it. "Mr. Kellerman, we've received information suggesting serious violations of fire safety codes in this building. We need to see your inspection records for the sprinkler systems on floors 20 through 25, as well as documentation of all fire safety maintenance performed in the past 2 years. I watched Frank's eyes dart around the room, and I could see him calculating his options. He led the inspectors to his office and started pulling files, but even from across the room, I could see his hands shaking slightly as he flipped through documents. "Here are our most recent inspection reports," Frank said, handing over the falsified paperwork I had photographed weeks earlier. "Everything's up to code, as you can see." Inspector Rodriguez reviewed the documents while her colleagues began testing the actual fire suppression systems. Within an hour, the discrepancies were obvious. The pressure readings didn't match the reported inspection results. Several sprinkler heads showed signs of corrosion that should have been noted in the fake reports, and the control panel fault codes I had documented were still active. "Mr. Kellerman," Inspector Rodriguez said, her voice hard as steel, "these inspection reports claim that certified contractors performed comprehensive system testing on dates when no such work was done. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Frank started sweating visibly. There must be some kind of mistake. Maybe the contractors made an error in their paperwork, or the system developed problems after the inspection. But the investigators weren't buying it. They had brought equipment to test the system's functionality, and the results were damning. Not only were the sprinkler zones on floors 20 to 25 operating at dangerously low pressure, but they found additional problems that I hadn't even discovered: blocked sprinkler heads, corroded pipes, and control panel malfunctions that rendered entire sections of the fire suppression system inoperative. By the end of the day, the investigators had identified violations that put the building in immediate non-compliance with fire safety codes. Inspector Rodriguez informed Frank that the building would be issued a notice of violation and that residents on the affected floors might need to be evacuated until repairs were completed. Frank's reaction was swift and predictable. He immediately started looking for someone to blame, and his eyes landed on me. The confrontation the next morning, Frank called me into his office with a look of barely controlled rage. Mike and Tony were conspicuously absent, probably warned to stay away while Frank handled his personnel issue. "Jessica, sit down," Frank said, his voice tight with anger. "I think we need to have a serious conversation about your future here." I sat down calmly, having prepared for this moment. "What did you want to discuss, Frank?" "Don't play dumb with me," he snapped. "Yesterday's inspection wasn't a coincidence. Someone fed those investigators information, and I have a pretty good idea who." "I'm not sure what you're implying." Frank leaned forward, his face flushed. "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that you're a disloyal, backstabbing little snitch who doesn't understand how the real world works. You think you can come in here with your fancy degree and destroy everything I've built." "Frank, I documented serious safety violations that put people's lives at." "Shut up," he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "You documented nothing. You created problems where none existed because you wanted to play hero. Well, congratulations, Jessica. You just cost hundreds of people their homes, cost the company millions in repairs, and cost me my reputation." I remained calm, which seemed to infuriate him more. Those violations existed long before I documented them. I just made sure they were addressed. "You made sure to destroy my career, you mean? Well, here's some news for you. You're fired. Effective immediately. Insubordination, failure to follow proper procedures, and violation of company confidentiality policies." I had expected this. "Frank, before you do anything you might regret, you should know that I've documented everything. The falsified inspection reports, the pattern of covering up safety violations, the fraudulent submissions to the insurance company. I've also retained legal counsel regarding whistleblower protection laws. Frank's face went from red to purple. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you that firing me in retaliation for reporting safety violations would be illegal. I'm also informing you that the Colorado Department of Labor, the building owners, and the insurance company will all be receiving copies of the documentation I've compiled. For a moment, Frank looked like he might have a stroke. Then, unexpectedly, he started laughing, a harsh, bitter sound. You stupid girl, he said. You have no idea what you've done. This building's been operating safely for 15 years under my management. A few minor code violations don't mean the sky is falling. But now, because of your meddling, hundreds of families are going to lose their homes, dozens of people are going to lose their jobs, and a perfectly good building is going to be tied up in legal battles for years. Frank, people could have died. People could die crossing the street. That doesn't mean we shut down every road in the city. At that moment, there was a knock on the office door. Frank's supervisor, District Manager Robert Hayes, entered with a grim expression and a folder of documents. Frank, we need to talk. Part 8. Justice served, the aftermath was swift and decisive. Within a week, Frank Kellerman was terminated for falsifying safety records and submitting fraudulent documentation to insurance companies. The Colorado Department of Labor launched an investigation into his practices, and the building owners, Riverside Properties LLC, faced potential criminal charges for negligent endangerment. But the most satisfying moment came when Robert Hayes called me into his office 3 days after Frank's termination. Jessica, I owe you an apology, he said. I've been reviewing the documentation you compiled, and it's clear that you prevented a potential catastrophe. The insurance company has confirmed that their coverage would have been voided if there had been a fire on those floors, because the safety systems weren't functioning as reported. He slid a document across his desk. We're offering you Frank's position as head maintenance manager, with a substantial salary increase and full authority to implement the safety protocols you've recommended. I looked at the offer, which represented not just vindication, but a chance to actually fix the problems I'd uncovered. What about Mike and Tony? They went along with Frank's cover-ups. Tony's been reassigned to a different property. Mike has agreed to full cooperation with our safety upgrades in exchange for keeping his job. He's actually been very helpful in identifying other issues that Frank had been hiding. The building owners invested over $2 million in infrastructure repairs and safety upgrades. The fire suppression system was completely overhauled, the water damage issues were properly addressed, revealing extensive mold problems that required professional remediation, and comprehensive maintenance protocols were implemented. 6 months later, I received a letter that made everything worthwhile. It was from Mrs. Williams in 12B, thanking me for insisting on proper repairs to her bathroom ceiling. The contractors had discovered that the water leak was caused by a major pipe failure that would have eventually caused her ceiling to collapse, potentially injuring or killing her and her family. Frank never found another job in building management. Word had spread through the industry about his falsified records, and no reputable company would hire him. I heard through the grapevine that he ended up working as a handyman for a small residential repair company, making a fraction of his former salary. The most ironic twist came a year later, when Riverside Heights won a Safety Excellence Award from the Colorado Building Owners Association for its comprehensive maintenance program and exemplary safety record. At the award ceremony, I was recognized as the Manager of the Year for my innovative approach to preventive maintenance and commitment to resident safety. As I stood at the podium accepting the award, I thought about Frank's words. Book learning is fine, but this is the real world, kiddo. He was right about one thing. This was the real world. A world where competence matters more than seniority, where safety matters more than cutting corners, and where sometimes the youngest person in the room has the most important thing to say. The residents of Riverside Heights sleep safely in their beds every night, protected by fire suppression systems that actually work, in a building maintained by people who understand that their job isn't just about fixing things that break. It's about preventing disasters before they happen. And Frank? Well, I'm sure he's learned that in the real world, actions have consequences. Even for people who think they're untouchable. Sometimes the system works exactly as it should. You just have to be brave enough to make it work. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.